Well, as Alyssa said, I welcome you to sort of come up here closer, but more than that, because it's a small group, I'm more used to small seminars. And so you should feel comfortable when when I'm going through this to raise your hands up and say, gee, I don't understand what in the world you're talking about, or gee, can you go over that point again? The further back you are, the harder it's to say those kind of things. But I'm quite comfortable in answering questions along the way. And so let's take this as sort of an interactive thing. I was thinking, because right after dinner, I might teach you something that's totally irrelevant. Have any of you heard of something called the alkaline effect? There's one person who's heard about the alkaline effect. Okay, good. There's a couple. For the rest of you, I thought maybe I'd amuse you by telling you what the alkaline effect is. And I think if I don't get it right, maybe other people can correct me. But it sort of accounts for why we get sleepy after we eat a meal. And so I assume all those people that aren't coming are going home to take a nap. Their favorite Sabbath activity. But what happens is, after you eat a meal, your stomach creates something called hydrochloric acid in order to help digest the food. And so for a little while, because it's pouring in acidic stuff into your stomach or creating acidic in your stomach, your body goes into an imbalance for a little while, and your body becomes alkaline for a little while. And for some reason, that causes people to become sleepy. So that's my excuse for becoming sleepy after eating. And I had such a good lunch that I took a walk to sort of try to counteract the alkaline effect, so I wouldn't go to sleep on you people in the middle of the talk. So anyway, I hope that you people will ask questions. I'm used to that. I'm not intimidated by that. So feel free to make this interactive. So my talk sort of covers what Alyssa said earlier today, but takes a totally different approach. And the difference in approach is that Alyssa is an English teacher at heart. She's into narratives. I'm on the opposite side. I'm more science, and so I'm more into graphs and things like that. And so we're different, and so although we're going to cover part of the same subject, it's going to sound I hope it's going to sound slightly different. So the question is, can Adventist schools meet parents' expectations? And so the question is, what are expectations? What are parents' expectations? And I think it's that their children become successful, that their children maybe maintain the religious traditions that the parents have, and maybe even go to church with them when they come home, if they go away. And finally, that their children are happy and that they have good marriage, and that their kids turn out to be nice kids. I think this is a pretty universal desire of all parents. So I'd like to explain why this doesn't happen. So everyone's got the same expectation, but why doesn't this happen? And this expression by S. Kerr, it's not Stephen Kerr, the basketball coach of the Warriors, but it's by a person in management. And this expression was given to me who was someone who was getting an MBA, and this is a management idea. And this is the thing, if you look at the bottom line, the folly of rewarding A while hoping for B. So I put within that the folly of parents rewarding A while looking for B. So I'm going to sort of explain this. It's going to be a sort of a theme throughout this talk of why we hope for something, but we frequently do something else. It's very common in business. And so this comes out of the business world, but I'm going to apply it here to us. And so what is the folly of parents rewarding A? And I would say there are at least these three things. One is sending their kids to public, secular, or private schools? Second, this is living a materialistic life. And finally, to evaluate Adventist culture and relationships. I would say that the first thing I think that I want to address especially is, why do people send their kids to public or secular schools? Some of them are 3 or 4 or 5 times more expensive than our Adventist schools. And I would suggest it's because they think their kids are going to do better over there. I think there's probably altruistic reasons for that. But I'd like to begin to sort of say why people are making, I think, bad decisions. So Alyssa talked about these 4 worldviews, and I have the question up here: what worldviews are related to choice A, picking those values I said? And so I could ask you that questions, but I would say many of those values are probably related to being me first. People thinking that they could make better decisions than what they were taught before. They think their education or whatever else gives them the opportunity to choose better than what traditional ways that we Adventists have chosen. Or they just don't feel like it. It's expensive to send your kids to school when you can send them to private school. To public school. So why not do the more convenient thing and buy a better car or something like that? So, I don't mean to hype a book I have that I've got a few copies, but if you want to know more about worldviews and really get into this kind of thing, I've got some extra copies that I can't sell to you today, but you can get them from me and then forward things to Alyssa. I don't make any money from the book. It goes to support Alyssa's research center. So if you're interested, we have a couple of copies. So let's deal with the first thing, the first hopeful expectation of the parents. They hope their children become successful professionally. And so the real question is, can Adventist schools foster professional success? I think that's a legitimate question. And to start with, the United States graduation rate is 86%, which isn't bad. The Adventist graduation rate from high school is 96%, which is about 10 points better on this scale. So if you just look at pure graduation rates, the Adventist system comes out pretty good compared to the average. You saw this graph earlier today, and I think this graph is really quite helpful. It's showing what happens if you go to school over a number of years. But I'd like to put this now into a different context, and now I'm going to put this into something that many of you have seen before. This is called, for those of you who aren't much into numbers, this is called a bell curve. And can you people see this arrow? I'm playing with this arrow. Yeah. There's a line here, and there's a line over here. Between these 2 lines right here in the bell curve are roughly 2/3 of the people in a population. So if you take students, 2/3 are in this way, in this category. Now, if you look and remember that graph that Alyssa showed you this morning that I just showed you a second ago, and you look at achievement, the students who have achievement go way past that line. And the group from here to here and from here to here make up 18, from here to here is 18% of the people, and this is 18%. You don't want to be on this side because that's the really bad side. This side is the really, really good side. If you're in this 18%, you are a lot better than average. You are in a different category of people. So this is the category you want to be in. Achievements, if you go to an Adventist school for 7 contiguous years, guess what? You're going to be past this line here. And if you look at this line right here, which is the ability line, you increase by 14% and you almost reach that line. Now, the thing that Alyssa didn't talk about ability, although she tries to emphasize it more these days, But the reason why the Iowa people and everyone that sees this data is so, they always ask the same question. Tell us how you can change ability. Because according to the Iowa people, ability is not supposed to change. It is not supposed to change. And so when they saw this change of 14%, they were shocked. They had never seen it before. It is, no one can claim, at least that I know of, to say they can change ability. That is, from an educational standpoint, absolutely remarkable thing. 14% change in ability. And I say, and I don't think I'm joking when I say that, that change in 14% in ability is probably the reason I got into medical school. You know, you have to have a certain ability in order to do certain things, and I think that's what happened to me. So anyway, this is a remarkable thing. So if you look at just the numbers Alyssa gave you this morning, the person is moved into the line, and so they're not only at the top of this average group, they are now starting to push outside of that group into really being very good. So anyway, I think that's pretty exciting information.
So, Doctor?
Yes.
May I interrupt?
Sure, please do. That's what I invited you to do.
Are we suggesting that ability
Yes.
within our Adventist system is primarily affected because of our spirituality, religiosity, and all of those other type of things?
We don't know. We don't know what the genesis for that is. And some of us are thinking about doing some studies that would try to ferret out those causes. But right now, it's a mystery. It happens, but we can't explain it.
So no one is hypothesizing that probably it. Not yet.
That's correct. It's one of the things that we don't know. We just know it happens. And it just doesn't happen on the West Coast. It happens all over the country, pretty uniformly in our system. So it's not a local effect, from the best we can tell. But it's a very exciting effect. It really is, from my standpoint of her study, the most exciting thing in her study, this change in ability. So, if you ask the question, which worldview is the most likely to result in improved achievement abilities, you got the answer this morning? And the answer is the others first. And this is, again, looking at it from a slightly different way. But in this scenario, you can see that there's a wider divergence of the others first than the other three categories. I'm going to come back to this, but this is really the first real evidence we have that a certain worldview really is superior to others, especially in the educational realm. But I'm going to come back to that. So many of you may have read this book called Outliers, The Key to Success by Gladwell, one of the really popular sociologists, I don't know what to call him, but really has made certain kinds of ideas very well respected within the community. In his Outliers, he says there are three factors that lead to success. And one is be just a little bit better. Now, I would say, if you look at just what I've just said, if you stick with the Adventist system, you're not a little bit better. You're a lot better. And especially if you have the right worldview, you really you're really in a wonderful position. So, but there are two other factors he says that are important. He says that you have to want to work in a certain area a whole bunch of hours, and then the culture is important. And so if you look at these two things and now think about those two things and put it within the framework that I talked about, children maintain relationship with them, and hopefully the children are happy. If you think about what these two things are talking about now, they're talking about character. You know, what Gladwell is saying, the kind of person you are and the environment you live in are very important to your success. And so I think that I'm going to talk about environment and character a little bit more, but it's really character, and I think Alyssa did a good job in saying, what are the characteristics that are important? And those characteristics are embodied in the idea of others first. It is interesting that if you look at the business world and you look at almost anything you want to look at, what they're looking for is a certain type of character. And if you look at underlying whatever they want, it's really others first that they're looking for. They're looking for people they can trust. They're looking for people that are reliable. They're looking for people that are creative. All those things are inherent within this others first worldview. So here's more about characters and how it plays into various things. And I asked, which worldview is most likely to result in good relationships? It's obvious it's others first, right? So the real question is how does one go about creating students with an others first worldview? You know, I think that's the real question. And since it's so great, I think it's so great. And I think many of you will recognize this picture. It's quite a famous picture, or the artist is quite famous. It's by Van Gogh, and it's called The Sower. Now, as many of you know, there's a parable in the Bible called The Sower. And I think within that story of the sower in the Bible is the secret, if you want to say the secret, on how to create others first. So let's go over a story that's very, that you all know about. The sower goes and throws seeds on 4 different types of ground. And I thought, once I was reading the story, one of the things I didn't realize is if you look over here, there's a bird over here getting ready to eat the seeds that have been dropped on the ground. And as you remember in the parable of the sower, the first part that the sower drops his seeds on is on the path. And the birds are there to pick up the seeds right away. Well, what soil is the fertile soil? Well, it's obviously the soil that was cultivated in the 4th episode. And when the seeds fall on that ground, things germinate and good things happen. So how should one interpret that story? And this is how I think Mrs. White interpreted the story. So this is my interpretation of Mrs. White. See, she says, if you start out, Jesus and the Holy Spirit are the ones that provide the seed. So the seed that's being sowed out there is the seeds are provided. The ideas, the basic things are provided by Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit. So what do teachers, parents, and pastors and all the rest of us have to do with this whole seeding thing? And I would suggest, according to Mrs. White, it's our job to help prepare the soil, If we don't have any kids, then it's our job to encourage children who are in that grade to be more. I would say that when I was growing up, I probably wasn't the best citizen. I mean, I would say I got into a lot of trouble. But it was interesting. I had certain teachers, like I had a piano teacher that always thought I was good. When I was in the present, I always felt good because they always thought that I was a good kid, No criticism of me, They didn't say what a lousy musician I was. They were always encouraging to me, in a positive fashion. Well, I think, and even at church, some people would get after me for running around the church, like some of these kids were here. Other parents would sort of pat me on the head and say, "Oh, nice boy," nice, whatever there were 2 different milieus that I lived within this community. And I think the dominant thing in the community I grew up in was to encourage me to be a better kid. And so I think there's a lot that people can do to prepare the soil. And if we prepare the soil, according to Mrs. White, the Holy Spirit and Jesus will help grow the seed. That it's not our job to grow the seed. It is our job to prepare the soil. And then at the end, the parable suggests that we can help in the harvesting of the good things that pop up. So the question is, how do teachers, parents, pastors, churches help prepare the soil? I mean, that's the question. Because I think we would all like to participate in this, at least everyone that's in here. And this is how teachers can do that. So this is for you and other people who are teachers. It's by helping students understand the benefits of the others first worldview and encouraging them to adopt it. I mean, I think everyone can do that, but the teachers are in a special position to do that. And then I'm going back to this graph again, because I think this is an important concept to take about others first. There are two types of others first. And this is why others first get a really bad rap. Because when most people think about others first, they think about people who can't say no, the enablers, the people who turn out to be doormats. And so if you talk about others first to most people, they think of people who can't say no and who are doormats. You know, they do it, you know, there's soft touches, etc. That's what most people think about as others first. But I would suggest that according to a book called Givers and Takers, that there is another category of others first, and those are the people who can say no. Those are the people who can practice tough love. Those people who can say, that's not good for you. I'm not going to say yes to you. Those people, according to this book, are very high achievers, really high achievers. And I would suggest that most of us, when we're doing good things, don't like to say no. I mean, it's not pleasant to say no to people. But I think if we can think about what's good for others, then that should attenuate this feeling of negativeness, something that comes to us when you say no. And, you know, ultimately, some of the best friends I have had in the past are people I've said no to. You know, I train physicians. I have the privilege of doing that. And for some, I said no, you know, or sort of pointed out things that aren't so good about them. And some of those people have turned out to really thank me and retain relationships with me because they knew I was looking out for the best interests. So if you can convince people that you're really on their side while you're saying no, that's the trick. And I think the person that was really good at that was Jesus, you know. I mean, his disciples knew when he was saying no, or, you know, I mean, how would you like to say, get me behind me, Satan? I mean, you know, I mean, imagine saying that to say, get behind Satan. I mean, how would you like to have someone, but I think that person understood that Jesus still liked them and that he was looking out for them. So anyway, I think that by doing that, both, and if you notice this is for parents and teachers, that this is the way of cultivating the soil. And the third way is really encouraging pastors to participate in campus activities. It has been, Alyssa has shown, she can't explain how it happens, but that when pastors are on campus, something happens, and those schools do better as far as achievement and ability. Alyssa says some of the pastors who have been contacted, that a lot of them say, I don't know what I do. You know, I just go play basketball. Or others say, I don't know. I just go there and you know, I eat lunch with them. You know, so it's not. I don't know exactly what happens. Alyssa doesn't know what happens, but there's something that magically that happens, and I think that that's sort of the influence that pastors can have on students. So it is really this combination of factors, and I think we as people that are just in the audience can also have this effect, as I was saying earlier, in helping our students to get better. So if we do all these things, I think the end result is that that we can help to create others first. And it's sort of interesting. If there's a cascade of things I have here, but on this side, and I thought I picked someone that I thought was really characteristic of someone that's others first, and I picked Albert Schweitzer. And if I were to say, how many people who even know who Albert Schweitzer is? How many people know who Albert Schweitzer is? Well, about a third of the group knows who Albert Schweitzer is. I asked my residents just this for the fun of it. None of them knew who Albert Schweitzer was. Albert Schweitzer died, I think, in the 1960s. Won a Nobel Prize when he was I think in 1952. He was a fascinating person. I'll tell you the story for the rest of you people who don't know him, and maybe even some of you who recognize the name. But Albert Schweitzer was born in 1875. By the time he was 30 years old, he had gotten a doctorate in theology. He had studied at many places before he got his doctorate from the University of Strasbourg. And he had grown up in Alsace-Lorraine area, which is in between. It's been sometimes French, sometimes German. I think it's German right now, but before that it was French for hundreds of years. And so he was in many respects culturally both French and German. So anyway, he got his doctoral when he was about 30 years old. But while he was getting his doctoral, now this is the amazing thing about this guy. While he was getting his doctoral, he actually became a world-renowned expert in Bach. And he was part of a group he was probably one of the most important people in the revival of Bach. Bach had gone dead, and now some people had started to revive him. And while he was in Paris studying theology, he also joined this group of people, Bach, and he became a real expert in organ. And so while he was growing up, he was very musically talented. His parents, his father was a minister in the Lutheran Church. He was talented musically. The local organ persons, at the church, taught him how to play piano and organ. When he went to Paris, he studied with one of the leading people who played Bach kind of music and learned from him. And by the time he got his doctorate, he was an accomplished Bach thing. They used to have sort of Bach festivals, and he would play the organ for this group of people in Paris, and it was very well known. Anyway, when he was 30 years old, he decided it was time to get on with life. And so he went to a society and said, I want to be a missionary to Africa. I'm going to now utilize my theological background, and I'm going to go work in Africa. But this group said, we're not sure we like your theology. And they said, well, you don't have enough experience, etc. So then he decided, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll make my theology practical. So he said, well, I'm going to become a doctor. And that's why I sort of picked him, because then he went to medical school and became a doctor. And it took him several years to do that. And guess what? During that time, he also happened to write, he had written earlier a book on Bach, and now he wrote a 2-volume book on Bach, definitive, one of the really big works on Bach. And that made him an international expert on Bach. And so he was also into the music world, played Bach all over the place, and also got his MD. So finally, when he got his MD, they let him go to Africa. and he moved backwards and forwards to Africa, and he would come back to Europe, play music, raise money, take the money, and go back and do his missionary work in Africa. Did that for many, many years. And as I said, he wrote this book called Reverence for Life, and it was probably largely because of that book that he won the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm not saying that every kid can do this that goes to Adventist school. I have no aspirations, but what I'm saying is that others first and that more egalitarian way of looking at life is something that can happen within this atmosphere. And the reason, this is the reason why I think it's much harder on this other side. So let's look at the other side. If you follow down these other worldviews, feelings worldview, me first worldview, I would suggest that all of these worldviews, and that the thing I have against most non-Adventist educational systems is they're all based on evolutionary theory. All the modern theories are all based on evolution. There isn't hardly a theory that I know about that isn't based on evolution. But what is the basis of evolution? It's really me first. You know, I've heard I've heard some people who are really into evolution talk about this modern mutation of genes that causes altruism. But when you talk to them, the reason for altruism is because it's good for them. It's a me first basis for altruism, which is crazy, you know. But when your whole philosophy is based on evolution, you have to come to say you should expect people are going to be me first. And I would suggest the outcome of that is one of these two things that happens today. In the old days, it was more Horatio Alger, which is, I'm going to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. I'm going to do it myself. Well, I can tell you that I've had a fair degree of success, as Don was telling you about, but I can tell you that my success was based upon other people. At every step of my growth and development, there were other people that were helping me. It wasn't Dan Kedo, whose ability increased 14% or whatever percent it might have increased. It was because God helped to grow me and other people helped to grow me. And so I think that I think the same thing happened to Albert Schweitzer. I never had the delusion that I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. It didn't happen because of some inherent wonderful thing I had. It was because of God's grace, I think. This philosophy of I can do it myself is, I think, an evolutionary idea. I think the other idea that we see much more commonly today is we live in a cycle of entitlement, right? I mean, and it's being encouraged by our government, you know? And certainly COVID-19 thing has encouraged even more entitlement. But entitlement is a natural part of the evolutionary idea, you know? Society should take care of me. As we evolve, society is going to take care of us. Government's going to take care of us. We're moving toward this wonderful something in the future, which, you know, and so it's natural that we should expect people to think of us depending on our philosophy. So, you know, I think this is the sort of the crux of the thing. You end up in different places depending on what you choose. And this is sort of the conclusion of my talk. I think the Adventist education system can meet parents' expectations, but, and this is a big but, only by prudently rewarding B can parents expect to have B. That as long as they reward A and expect B, it's never going to work. It's only if you're going to reward B can you expect to get B results. And so this is another picture of Van Gogh. This is now called The Harvest. And if you sort of think about what I said earlier, and I said that if you do these things and if you help plant the seeds, guess what? You can participate in the harvest. And that's what it's really all about. Do we believe that that if you do the right things, that there is this reward for the harvest. Well, I've lived long enough to see that God's plan works, and that ultimately we can be a part of that. And there's no reason why we can't enjoy being part of the harvesting group. We got to prepare the soil, help prepare the soil, but God will reward us and help us in the harvest. Well, anyway, thank you for letting me share some ideas. Yes.
What difference do you make? You had a slide up there that talked about hard work, and yet you say the evolutionary side is pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. How do you line up those two statements you've made in your slides?
What do you mean? What did I say about hard work?
Well, one of your slides talked about you have to work hard, it takes hard work, or something like that. You had that on your slide.
Well, I don't think I said that. There is a slide, a Gladwell slide, that says that there's people that spend 10,000 hours on some sort of activity to gain a certain expertise. I think there's a slide that Gladwell talks about people who spend 10,000 hours in an area, and that gives them a certain expertise. And I would say that a very essential part of people growing up is that they need to, that people should help them find an area that they're interested in and help them cultivate those areas of interest. And it's interesting that one illustration he gives, he says the difference between a good piano player, a piano player that wins local contests, and a concert pianist is that during this formative year, that good pianist that can win local contests, that's better than most people, practices about 6,000 hours. But he says the ones that go on to become concert pianists practice 10,000 plus hours. And so I think so often when kids are interested in things, it's part of our job to help them sustain those interests, to develop those interests. And so I don't want to equate that with hard work. What I want to equate that with us helping kids when they see some area where they're interested in, to help them cultivate it. You know, it might be in the field of arts. It might be cooking. It might be anything, you know. It might be people who are going to become writers, to help them, you know, get books. It could be anything, and during that formative period, I think it's really that part of the cultivating the soil is helping people to realize what their talents are, and then helping them cultivate those talents. Not the same for everybody. And I think so often, especially when we grew up, you know, women had certain things, and I, as a male, I could have been a teacher, I could have been a pastor, I could have been a doctor. It was one of the three choices, you know. I mean, I knew I wasn't fit to be a teacher, so I had two other choices, and I didn't think I was that spiritual, so I took the third choice, you know. Don and I took the third choice. So, you know, I think if I had to live my life over again, I don't know, I might have been an architect, you know. I enjoy gardening, I enjoy designing gardens, so I might have enjoyed being a garden architect. I might have, you know, I admired Don because Don was a history major, and I've gotten to enjoy history much later in my life. So if I could have lived my life, maybe I would have liked to have maybe become a history teacher or a history professor or something like that. There's, you know, when you're young, you know, it's our job to expand the horizon, I think. And I value people along my life at every stage of my evolution in my life. People have shown me an expanded view. When I was in the 9th grade, someone expanded my view. When I was in medical school, someone expanded my view. When I was in my residency, someone expanded my view further. And even when I was in my professional life, there were people at different times to expand my view even further. So I think God has helped my growth by having people who have helped me to cultivate, who have helped to cultivate me to expand who I am. And so I think God has provided me great teachers throughout my life. Don?
I think that people that I've been associated with, say teachers or many teachers, they can come into three categories. There are those that don't really care that much, and it doesn't make that much difference to them whether you succeed or fail. There's a very few people who actually don't want you to succeed. And then there are people who really want you to succeed. And I think the beauty of Adventist education is most of the people want you to succeed. They want you to be successful. They're not trying to hold you back or flunk you or make your life a living hell, which can happen. I think that a great proportion of our teachers, our schools, they're trying to help you. They're trying to make you a better person and make you successful.
You know, I think that frequently people talk about different schools of different qualities and why sometimes Adventist schools aren't maybe quite up to it. I happen to go to what I would consider to be, I went from first grade through medical school to Adventist school, so I understand the system. And during my first to ninth grade, I went to, I think what would be considered sort of, I went to San Francisco Junior Academy. I wouldn't choose any other school to go to, but I think by all standards it would be considered to be a subpar Adventist school. And it was interesting. One time we had the highest truancy rate, you know, percentage-wise in the city. You know, and yet in the class that I was in, one of them became an anchor for ABC News in San Francisco. Another person became a physician with me. I think there were, and there was only about 10 of us that were in there, or 10 or 11 of us that were in there. 3 or 4 became nurses of various levels. It was a remarkable group. I don't know if anyone that I can say was a failure in that group that had reasonable abilities, you know. And so I think God blesses people who play the system, you know. I think God takes responsibility, just the way He took responsibility for my growth. I mean, He helped me to grow. You know, I think that's one of the things that God says. He will help you, and if He says that He'll help you, and you go along a certain path, guess what? He will help you. And as I said, I have had some of the best teachers that you could possibly get, and the one thing that has helped me is, and these people were remarkable that helped me. I would say to maybe one of the greatest physicists, medical physicists in the United States, Don, I don't understand what you're talking about. And he would explain to me. And I said, Don, I still don't understand what you're talking about. And after the 3rd or 4th time, I would start to dawn on me. And I would say, I think I'm getting it, Don, but I think I'm going to have to ask you some more questions. And it was because God had taught me maybe certain humility and not having to be, you know, whatever else, that I could say I didn't know. You know, and I think that's part of Christianity, that here's God, creator of the universe. I mean, who are we to you know, tout what our accomplishments are? And I think that I think God's promises of helping us to become better people in any realm are consistent. And I think the younger a child starts, the further they can go. And I say to myself sometimes, I wish I would have taken Christianity more seriously earlier in my life, because I could be a better person today. I could have done more today if I'd have taken it more seriously earlier in life, and taken the right worldview earlier in life, accepted the right worldview earlier in life. So I'm a testimony in one way to success, but I think I could have been a lot more successful if I would have. Yes.
How do you account for many of our kids that have gone through our educational system?
Right.
By the time they get to college age or beyond, they leave the church.
Yeah, you know, I would say, looking back on my PUC experience, some of the brightest people I know have left the church. And I think that one of the tragedies to our church is exactly that. And I think it's because there haven't been enough people who have encouraged growth and who have had a framework that allows questioning and not having answers. So I've always said, I wish our church wasn't a church of answers. You know, we claim we can answer this, claim we can answer that. I wish our church was more a church that said, we are a church who has a process to get answers. So we question, we don't claim to have all the answers, but we are a church of growth. That we are a church that wants to grow. We are a church that pursues growth. And therefore, people can question and don't have to have answers. Because I think some of the answers that we have given people are wrong answers. And therefore, when people see that the answers that were given were wrong, then they say, well, you know, gee, I don't want to be with these guys. People keep saying this is right when it's really wrong, right? So I think if we were to encourage the spirit of continual growth that I'm talking about, then what's wrong with being wrong? It's just a matter of going on and doing what's right.
I think it's because we say, our church said no too often, and when the kids grow up, they feel like it's so restrictive. I don't know about the colleges now, but in the old days,
Yeah.
colleges, you cannot leave the campus after 9 or 10
Yeah.
o'clock, and you cannot do this and cannot do that. It's a culture of
Yeah.
no, so it's restrictive.
All that stuff is gone. I can tell you that stuff is gone.
That's
Yes.
what the kids leave.
Yeah.
Leave the church.
Excuse me.
I think in the past, I know at least as I went through Adventist school.
Right.
There was, and I taught for a long time, so there was an emphasis on performance.
Yes, I think so.
And that can be very discouraging.
Right.
I think, you know, the do's and the don'ts. I think what God is interested in, because you can have the so-called perfect performance that the scribes and Pharisees had,
Yes.
but they didn't recognize him when he came.
Right. Well, you know,
Presented it. I think God is interested in the heart, and the heart takes a lot more time and energy to
Right.
persuade and change a heart. It's much easier to say, this is the rule, and if you break it, you're gonna get, you know, this is the
Right.
consequence. It's
Right.
a lot more difficult, but you have a lot more success, real success, when you can touch a heart.
well, I'll tell you that one of the great things that happened to me, and I think probably happened to Don, is when we were in medical school, there were two people. One was Graham Maxwell, and another was Provancha. And when I left medical school, I left with the idea that God was big enough that I could ask any question I wanted to, and it was okay. That God was not intimidated by me asking questions, and that the only thing that was important was my relationship with God. All the other things were just, they were okay, but that as long as my relationship with God was okay, then everything else was okay. And so, and that God, and with that idea came the idea of growth. That God wanted me to grow, God wanted me to ask questions, and that it was all okay. And once I understood that, then one of the bad things that happened to me, but also one of the good things that happened to me, was I was drafted, and you know, as Don was probably drafted. We were all drafted into the Army. The one thing that I learned about being in the Army was institutions with all their flaws. So I've been an institutional person all the rest of my life, and so it doesn't bother me to see flaws in institutions because I'd seen it already in the Army, in a worse way. And so I understood institutions, and so institutions never bothered me, you know. And so the Adventist churches with its flaws doesn't bother me. It's just an institution, you know. It's not God. You know, it's an institution that does a lot of good things. I think it has a lot of truths in it. I can't find anything better, so I remain an Adventist. But it's God and myself, ultimately. Yes.
Yeah, to my brother's question, we have kids coming to church, visually looking like they were raised in Adventism.
Mm-hmm.
But why do they leave? We find that our situation today,
Mm-hmm.
that many are leaving. I like to suggest, and I'm almost perturbed that my dear, blessed, gifted, talented Professor Kedo, she didn't jump out and say, we have research there with Steve Barna. he answers that question, actually. And so instead of me going long into that, I would like to suggest one thing. Steve Barna has brought out in his research this very situation. Why are our kids leaving? He writes a book, and if you ever want to know, I suggest you looking at it. It's called Raising Spiritual Champions. And it's almost pathetic, but it goes back to the home, the school, and the church. As parents and adults, we have dropped the ball in a very big way. And instead of putting all that blame, I want to go back to my childhood experience growing up in a little black church in Stockton, California. I'm sorry, but our church had it together. Everyone worked together. Pathfinders was thriving. Why? Because loving adults were in that little program, going on those boring, stupid, cold, chilly campouts that I'm sure they hated because you hate them too. And eating that terrible food and couldn't wait to get back home and eat real stuff. And not taking a shower or a bath for 3 or 4 days. And yet they did it and they made it fun. And it was great. And I remember growing up in that, and I remember at Christmas time, we go out and collect canned goods before Thanksgiving. The whole church did it. And it was an amazing experience. I remember this man, he always looked like a grandpa to me. Until he died, he always looked like a grandpa. And he'd be out there old and, walking about the fall. And we grew up with that village. That's the only thing that we knew was God is with us. Amen. All this type of stuff. And we learned to pray because of those mirror neurons. We heard people who prayed well. We learned to mimic that stuff.
Yeah.
And sing. We hardly have that. We have this me too worldview, or this me, only me type of thing. People still come to church. They're not really involved in the lifeblood, the heartbeat of mission, what I call inreach, or for that matter, outreach. And Steve Barna talks about that.
And basically, you're mirroring what I've said today, which is folly rewarding A and hoping for B.
Exactly.
And that is such a pervasive concept. And as I said, when I heard that the first time from my person who's taken an MBA, I said, what a wonderful expression. I mean, and I wasn't talking about other people. I was talking about myself and some of the things I do where I do A and I'm hoping for B.
And there is, if I may, I want to go left. The pastor's question. I wanted to share in that. He said, we have people who work hard. What is the difference between a hard worker? And I couldn't really catch the second part of that. I was going to ask him, but he left.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and the reason why I bring this out he's a hard worker. And I think the whole church would say that. He works hard. And all I wanted to say was I appreciated what your wife, Dr. Kedo, brought out, is the idea that Adventists, and this is really a blessing, they have a whole parameter to understand life in. That great controversy. Within that umbrella, we understand our purpose in this life. We understand that. There's no doubt about that. And I'm sixth generation like you. And first grade through graduate school in the Adventist system, we understand every living day of our life, why we are alive. Within that context, hard working for the master has its place. It does. I work hard every day. Part of it on my knees, and the other part inside the classroom with those kids. Every single day. But going to Gladwell's book, Michael Jordan, you read it, he was in there. He worked hard too. He did the 10,000 hours.
Yep.
Bill Gates, he worked hard too. He was creating programs from middle school. His mother went to the local college and said, hey, my kid's creating programs. Can he sit in at the college? And she goes, yeah. And he kept on creating them and did the Microsoft thing.
Yeah.
And she named everyone else. And we can look now and see. I can see how the work hard thing outside of the context of great controversy is nothing but evolutionary theory, the survival of the fittest. I'm fitter than you because I can do this for 10,000 hours and I'm going to be at the height of greatness.
Yeah.
It's nothing but evolutionary lifestyle.
Well, but you know, I think the benefit that we have is where we want to focus. And I have an amusing story that some of you would be amused at, is that I wasted a lot of time when I was young trying to be a basketball player. I lived in not a great part of San Francisco, and I used to go play occasionally. There were two places I used to go play. And again, excuse me for being racially not as sensitive as it should be, but there was one playground I went to that was mainly white people, and there was one playground that was mainly black people. And at one playground I was sort of average, and at the other playground I wasn't very good. At the black one I wasn't very good, because at the black playground there were they had a brand new gymnasium, wonderful hardwood floor, and people used to come and play there because the facilities were so good. And there were a lot of kids that played there were all San Francisco players, older people who had gone there. And I remember once when I was, I think I was about a sophomore in high school or something like that, maybe a junior, I don't know when it was. I was there playing, and we play 3-on-3, which means that you shoot, and the first 3 are on one team, second 3 are on the second team, and then you go and play each other. And if you win, you can play the next round, and if you win, you can play the next round. Well, anyway, I shot, and I was in the second round, so we're playing this other group. And as you might expect, I was the shortest person, but I had a reasonable shot back in those days. And I was guarding this guy who was, everyone was taller than me, but he was several inches taller than me, and maybe a few pounds heavier than I was at that time. And I was trying my best to guard this guy, and I might have scored maybe 4 points, but he probably scored 8 points or something like this. But at the end, somewhere in there, he turned and accidentally hit me in the mouth and chipped 2 of my teeth. And being a tough guy, I didn't say anything, And I went and sat, and I went and sat down after our team lost, mainly because of me. And so I said to this guy next to me, "Who's this guy I was guarding? I mean, he's pretty good." I had never seen him before. And someone said to me, "Well, he used to be all city, and he's been away back east for about a year, He's just come back, and this is the first time I think he's played, so, he's sort of rusty. So I said to myself, as I was walking home that day, and I was sort of thinking about this, I was saying to myself, what in the dickens am I doing trying to compete with this guy? Or guys like that, and trying to become a good basketball player. I said, the only way I can compete is with my size. In Japanese are known as people who can't jump. So, we might be agile, but we can't jump. And so I said, what in the world am I, what am I doing spending all this time playing basketball? I had to be spending more time using my brain. And so I remember walking down home and saying to myself, the only way I'm going to compete is with my brains. But 2 chipped teeth were worth the lesson. I might not have learned the lesson, otherwise. So I think God has many ways of teaching us. I'm thankful for all the ways and all the things He's done for us, for me. And I only hope that you people might remember the expression of the folly of A, rewarding A, and share this with you people are obviously interested in this kind of stuff. But if you talk to some of your friends, you might convey some of the things that that you've heard here today. They are, I think, very practical things. I think what Alyssa and I have talked about are very practical things, and we actually thank you for the opportunity to spend time with you like this, and especially we've enjoyed meeting Dawn again, and renewed our friendship, and Julie, I think. Am I pronouncing that? Am I finally getting your name right? Yeah. Anyway, it was great. We had a wonderful time with you people yesterday. Yes.
I have a question on the data on Adventist schools.
Uh-huh.
I grew up in Singapore.
Yes.
My father was a pastor, and
Uh-huh.
very conservative. But our school,
Yes.
Adventist school in Singapore, did not match up with the government schools. Although a few of us did excel, and but the majority of the students did not do as well as outside school, because these are students that were rejected from outside that came to our school. So I don't know how to fit that into the data that was presented.
I think the data that Alyssa collected was United States, Canada, and Bermuda. I think if you want to look at data, I don't think yours is anecdotal, but who knows if you did a real statistical look at that, how it would look. I think so often we make assumptions on a couple of experiences we have, but I'm into bigger databases, and I think that the trouble with small samples is always is always hard to make conclusions from small samples. So I don't know. I don't know I don't have no idea what the situation is in Singapore. But I think maybe I'd be happy to answer those more questions if you have them. But I think we probably have gone on long enough, and I would like to again thank you for your attention. Oh.
But you'll have to send me $10.
I'm sure we've all enjoyed Danny and Alyssa's contributions. We all have people we look up to in various fields, and I really look up to Danny and I look up to Alyssa. I think they've done a lot for Adventist education, and I thank them for being with us. Let's bow our heads. Father God, you put us on this earth for a special purpose, and we want to take the time to find out what we're supposed to